Welcome to another edition of Laser Radio. I'm Brad Soner. On today's show, we have another installation of the Legends series here on the Laser Radio podcast, talking with a two-time Summer Olympian. He competed in the 72 and 76 Summer Games, a former winner of the Coors Classic, and multi-time national champion. Some of our younger listeners may simply know him as Peter Stetina's uncle, but we know him as Wayne Stetina. We talked with Wayne about his time racing, a little bit about what he's doing now over at Shimano as the road product specialist there. He's had his hand in pretty much all the road products that you've seen coming out of Shimano over the last 20 years, so some really interesting stuff on the show today. But first, this episode of Laser Radio is brought to you by the new Laser Bullet helmet, the perfect combination of aerodynamics and ventilation. The Bullet is designed with a narrow front profile and smooth top section with minimal venting for maximum aerodynamic benefit. The air slide system allows for ventilation on demand with a quick and easy adjustment of the front vent cap. Compatible with both the Laser LifeBeam integrated heart rate monitor system and the Laser Inclination Sensor Position Monitor, the Bullet is available in both standard and MIPS versions. In stock and available now, visit your local Laser dealer for more information on the Laser Bullet. Wayne, thanks for joining us today. Really happy to have another installation of the Legends series on Laser Radio. Wayne, we're going to talk first about your early career, early life, and then we'll move into your racing career and then your current position working at Shimano. So let's start with you growing up in Indiana. What's the deal with the Stetina family out there? Is it something in the water in Indiana? Is it in the Stetina DNA? You produced the family produced a long line of very strong cyclists.
Well, my father was a Ohio State champion riding a bike, and he won a number of races in his career. And it turned out that my mother was Ohio State women's champion on several occasions.
Wow.
Which I didn't really appreciate until I was starting to ride a bike at about 8 or 9. And I was so proud of myself that I thought I was getting pretty good at it. And my dad pulled my mom's bike out of the garage and kind of dusted it off and pumped up the tires. And we went riding, and she destroyed me. So, that was
an eye-opener.
That wasn't how I expected that ride to go.
Yeah. And all of your brothers raced at some point. It sounds like
I was the oldest of 4.
Yeah.
And so after that experience, my dad bought a bike at a police auction. I think it was like an English racer. It was a 3-speed. And he turned it into a fixed-gear track bike and put it wasn't like, I was in the 8-9 year age bracket,
okay.
And it wasn't a 24-inch wheel; it was a full-size wheel. So the stem was on backwards, so that I could reach the bars.
Sure.
And I was riding that and training with the racers. And in 1963, in Indianapolis, I showed up to ride a race that a lot of the local guys were doing. There was a really strong contingent of riders that were winning races and contending for Olympic teams in Indianapolis. And I wasn't allowed to race because I had a fixed gear and a front brake. I didn't have a coaster and 2 working brakes. The rules had changed since my dad had been racing, and he didn't realize that. And it was a very different time. There probably weren't 2,000 licensed riders in the country. There wasn't a category only at nationals and some of the tracks. It was rare that there was a category for 9-year-olds. So I would have been racing with the 17-year-olds and under. So obviously, I was just try to keep up and survive as long as I could. And that's what I learned how to do. Riding with the seniors was just, you learn to survive and hang on to a group and conserve energy. So after that, I got my mother's old Schwinn Paramount that started as a track bike and was converted to be a 10-speed road bike because it was 5 gears in the back with down-tube friction shifting.
Sure.
So the following year, I showed up at a race, I think it was Kokomo, Indiana, and this is before my brothers were racing. Maybe Dale was starting to ride a bike a little bit. That's Peter's dad. And I did a lot better. I was at least allowed to race. And that's the first time I saw John Howard. Mm-hmm. And he went on to make the 64 Olympic team and the 68 Olympic team. By that time, all my brothers were starting to ride, and my dad was racing sports cars. And I had a mechanical aptitude. I was helping rebuild engines and transmissions, and he was also a speed skater, so we were speed skating in the winter and as a family. And he decided that car racing was way too time consuming, and if we would go back into sports, then, you know, all the sons could participate and it would be healthy. And it seems like with auto sports, you spend 95% of your time preparing the car, 4% of your time driving to the event, and about 1% of the time on the racetrack. So that is...
I guess you could argue there's some parallels in cycling there too, but I think
the training in
participate
cycling
a lot more on a bike. Yeah,
the training in cycling is very different than staying up late at night right. tinkering, trying to put an engine or a transmission together and make your car run.
Right.
So by 1970, I had been doing very well as a junior, and I set a goal that I wanted to make the 1972 Olympic team at the age of 18. And it was interesting that by 1972, I did make that team, and John Howard was our team leader that year. And all my brothers with the age brackets were every 3 years, and that was the way the age brackets were set. We had senior, junior, intermediate, and midget, as they were called back in the old Amateur Bicycle League of America days. And so it was not uncommon that when our family showed up with a large motorhome that my dad had bought, it was a converted mail truck that was like 35 feet long, we would win every category. And we had a number of trophies that were first place in every division at a given event. And they used to give really big trophies. I still have a few trophies that are practically as tall as I am.
Wow.
I saved a few.
We got to get back to that in cycling. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I don't know, because at that time we were amateurs, and when they started giving
that's true.
treasury bonds, when we would get a pair of tubular tires, I mean, we were over the moon when there was a prize like this. You could not accept cash, but you could get a treasury bond, and so it was, it was a very, very different time. You would show up to a big race, and there would be 30 or 40 people, and there might be 100 or 200 starters at national championships from all over the country. The sport continued to grow very slowly, and the level of racing kept ratcheting up all the time. And I believe that our family was a key part of that. So there was a transitional time that then led to Le Mans coming through, the same age as or maybe a year younger than my third brother, Joel. And then eventually transitioned to Lance and to all the top world tour riders that we now have.
Sure.
So, I mean, at the time, there was just racing in our country, in the U.S., domestically, primarily focused on criteriums. And then there was European racing at the pro level. And that was at a very different level. So gradually, I mean, when I was racing, I was always the team mechanic for our family. I built all the wheels. I maintained all the bikes. I did everything for, and so as a race mechanic, that was probably more experience for me than working in a bike shop.
Yeah. In the field, you talked about making the Olympic team and making a goal of trying to get on the Olympic team from a fairly young age. I'm curious what the selection process was like back then. You know, in a world where there was no pro cycling stats, there was no live streaming of these races. I mean, what did making the Olympic team entail for you?
There was an Olympic trials where everyone would do well in races to get invited to that, and about 60 riders would show up, and it was in Lake Saranac in upstate New York near Lake Placid. Sure. That we had the 72 trials, and we had I think an individual time trial and then a two-man time trial, and then put teams together to ride a four-man time trial, because I actually made the Olympic team on the selection on the 100-kilometer four-man team time trial. And then there were, I believe, 2 road races. And there was some discretion on the coach's part, but it was based on beating people head-to-head. Yeah. And that has been the Olympic selection procedure in all the sports: swimming, run, track and field.
When you're in.
Yeah, that was how it went. And now it's changed a little bit based on World Tour points ranking and classics that, if you have proven and many times it's if you are a defending world champion, because we have people that fit in that category.
Yep.
So now it's a very different time now for cycling, and we have over 60,000 licensed riders, and so there's quite a larger participation pool.
Do you think the selection criteria has gotten a little out of hand? I mean, is it too confusing at this point? Would you like to see it go back to just, whoever wins nationals and a few certain races can get in, or go back to an Olympic trials setup?
No, I think that the way it is now is actually much better, because it's an artificial race, and especially road racing is very tactical. And just because it may not be hard enough without enough other good riders to show who is really capable to perform at that level. So it's not just the course that makes the event, but the speed and the riders that you ride with. The European junior racing is basically at the same speed and performance level as most of the U.S. domestic pro racing. And so if you just put the juniors together and have them race, you almost have to throw the juniors in with the domestic pro seniors to really have an idea of how they'll perform at that level.
Right. Really
so I think I think it's difficult to be fair, and any athlete who doesn't get selected is always certain that it was coaching bias and he got screwed.
The process is flawed.
Yeah. Now, I was on the board of directors for the USA let's see, when was that? Maybe 1979 to 1984, when we hired Dave Prouty before the Olympics in Los Angeles. And then I got back on the board in the early mid-2000s through about 2012. And so I was involved in a lot of writing the criteria. And it is so difficult to be fair and to come up with something that can't be challenged in court. And, of course, that's one of the beauties of the American legal system is that you can always find a reason to challenge
everything can be challenged in court.
Exactly.
As long as you're paying the lawyers by the hour, anything can be challenged in court.
So when I went on then to, along with my brother Dale, all three of my younger brothers were national champions at one time or another. I can remember that my youngest brother was a midget. It was like the 9 to 12-year-olds. And he had gone up to Milwaukee Super Week and gotten beaten by Jackie Bradley, Jeff Bradley's younger daughter, who was a multi-national champion on the road and track. And he was so upset. He said, "I'm going home and train really hard."
Yep.
He went home, trained really hard for a week, came back to nationals, and finished a very close second in the road race.
Well, there you go. Nothing makes you train harder than a bad beat.
Well, he did a lot of intervals, and he worked at it. He had a lot of talent, and he went on to win some other national titles. But he was crying. I got to him right after the finish, and I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Don't tell Dad. I made a mistake. I didn't sprint in my top gear." And it was a long downhill tailwind sprint on the Milwaukee Lakefront course, which is extremely fast when the wind is with you.
Oh, yeah, the Milwaukee
Lakefront they were
course,
spun out, and he still almost won. His last year in Bear Mountain, as a junior, he was coming into the final sprint, and I think Roy Nickman won all the titles that year. Very famous name. Yeah. And I believe my brother he had track speed. I think he would have won. There was somebody got caught in the rain in one of the pavement slab cracks on the parkway and took down 10 riders, including him. And he trained really hard for that. He said, "I don't want to do this anymore. I put everything into it, and it just didn't work out."
Cycling can be a cruel sport in that way, that's for sure.
Oh, it's not fair. It depends. I mean, there are so many more ways to lose a race. It's interesting. I mean, the whole point is to get across the finish line first. And in a criterium, it's easy. You want to be in the last corner, second or third wheel.
Sure.
The problem is everybody knows that. That's where it gets interesting. There's not room.
Everyone knows about the high points in your career. We always hear about, winning the Coors and going to the Olympics and stuff like that. Was there a low point like that in your career at one point? I mean, was there a time where you thought, maybe I shouldn't be a pro cyclist?
Well, actually, technically, I never raced as a pro. My younger brother, Dale, did turn pro, but we were racing in the United States, and at that time when we were at our best in the late 70s into the very early 80s, you could ride every event domestically as an amateur, and you could go for the Olympics as well. And then the pros were limited. There were a lot of races they couldn't enter. So the only benefit to really being a pro was to be racing in Europe.
Right.
And at that time, I decided I needed to finish college, and I'd raced enough in Europe. I'd done the Tour of Switzerland a number of times. I'd been to the Worlds and, placed in the top 40, top 50 in the road race. I was competitive, but I realized that probably, that wasn't for me. And also I had contacts, and with all the rain and the weather, that was miserable. I've since had eye surgery that I don't need to wear glasses, and I mean that makes a huge difference. And I'm currently lower body fat and about 10 pounds lighter than I was when I was at my best racing. And
wow.
and that is my job allows me to test product a lot and write reports, and it gives me an opportunity to stay fit enough to ride with my nephew Peter or any of the other top pros we sponsor. I mean, as long as they're riding aerobically and they're staying at 300 to 350 watts for extended periods of time, I can do my best to hang on and do 100 miles with 10,000 vertical feet in the mountains. But then they go really fast, and it's unimaginable how fast they are. So the joke with my nephew, every time he's traveling, he says, I always run into people that say, "Oh, you're Peter Stetina." "Yeah, I know your uncle."
Yeah.
He says, "Doesn't matter that I'm one of the top world tour riders in the, but with the younger riders, I always introduce myself as Peter Stetina's uncle."
Sure.
And then they go, "Oh, I know who Peter is." So I just tell them that's my goal, is to be famous as your uncle.
It's all about perspective, right?
Yeah, if you get on the podium more often, that'll help me a lot with that goal.
You get a chance to see a lot of, obviously, a lot of high-level racing. Now working at Shimano, vice president there, road product specialist. You spent a lot of time with the new gear. But I want to ask about the old gear. When you were racing, what was the tech you were most excited about during your racing career? Like, what was the coolest thing coming to the market that you thought was just going to make you 100 times faster once you got it on your bike?
I guess I'm an ultimate tech geek and a weight weenie type of a guy, because I realized very quickly how much difference it makes if you can ride lighter wheels and tires that will get through survive the race, the lighter the bike.
So wheels were your thing.
So yeah, I started out, as I said, showed up on a fixed gear bike, and I was very excited to get derailleurs on my bike. And then we went from 5 to 6 to 7-speed cogs. So in 1981, I had gotten connected with Shimano and had there was a Shimano Panasonic team that they sponsored, and then Shimano was supporting me and my brother Dale with all the equipment we wanted. And I got some of the new 7-speed AX rear free hubs, and it wasn't compact spacing, it was wide spacing. And I got my bike built up. I was down in Texas at the Tour of Texas. I was training in January or February of 81, and just after I got my new frame assembled with all these new Shimano components, it was just bothering me, all of that space in there. And I took off the wide chain and I put the narrow Sadist chain that we were riding at the time, and I got a belt sander, and there were plastic spacers. I cut down by hand. I just turned them on the lathe and made them all narrower and stacked 8 gears in it. And then I went riding about a half hour later. And so I made the first 8-speeds and started making those for my brother Dale and for some of the other riders that we knew. And I just went straight to Compact 8 at that point.
Yeah.
And I gave Shimano a lot of feedback over the next few years. Not about the parts like, oh, I like this, I don't like that, but, well, this is good, but it has this problem in the real world, and this is how you need to fix it. And so the guys that had been supplying me parts was getting a lot of credit for coming up with solutions. So when I failed to make the 84 Olympic team, and they went on to win all the medals. And that was Alexei Greywall and Davis Finney, Nickman, Kiefel, Andy Hampsten, a whole new generation of top riders. And so I interviewed with Shimano, and when I came out to California, they showed me a bike. It didn't have aero brake levers. It had the cables out in the air, which I hated. It got rid of the Dynadrive cranks, which was a good thing because I had broken a pedal spindle and had a really bad crash on one of those pedals. And I had gone back to running Campy cranks and pedals with my Shimano drivetrain, and it only had 6 gears, and I was used to 8.
Yeah.
And so they didn't say anything to me. I was interviewing for a job out here in California, and I went to shift gears, and it clicked, and bang, it went in gear. I was like, wow. So it was November, and it was 80 degrees out, which was nice. So I went for a 3.5-hour ride. And the whole time I was thinking to myself, do I need this? Is this really that good? And I went home after the interview, and I got on my racing bike, and it was, 40 degrees, drizzling rain, and the friction shifting, and I just realized how bad it was in comparison. And I knew this is going to really change bike racing. Index shifting allows everybody to shift as well as the pros do, and you never miss your gear. You just click it, and it's in gear.
So you've presided over 2 major changes now then, but from 7 to 8, and then from mechanical to electronic shifting with Shimano.
Yeah, well, I
guess you're also there 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11.
We haven't gone to. Yeah, we haven't gone past 11 yet. I mean, that's a long story how each one happened. But I was very, very concerned that. When I first went to work at Shimano, it was strange how difficult it was to get people to try it. That they knew how to shift. They didn't need it. And I would take my bike into all the shops and give people test rides. And then I was going to the races. I was sending myself to the Nabisco Wheat Thin Series, and wound up leading the series. I think Tom Schuler finally won the overall, but I wound up winning the national road race again that year, which for the elites, which was during the Coors Classic. And so fortunately all the 7-Elevens and Thurlow and Steve Tilford and Andy Hampsten were out in Colorado. So that made it quite a different race. I mean, it was amazing time back then that the amateur racing was at the same level as the pro racing. Yeah. There will never be another time that a rider like Steve Bauer, who got second to Alexei at the Olympics, would turn pro and 2 or 3 weeks later in the pro world road race at 160 miles get third.
Yeah.
Nobody can go from amateur racing to pro racing because the level is so different. So we were, even though we were racing amateurs, when we were racing the Russian professionals and the East German professionals that were racing as amateurs and were on the medical programs that they were on, and the Colombian climbers. When my brother Dale won his second Coors Classic, it was against Steve Bauer and Lucho Herrera. And 2 years later, Lucho Herrera won 2 stages in the Tour de France, and he won the King of the Mountains competition by like twice as many points as anybody else. And Bernard Hinault said that he was the best climber that Hinault had ever seen, ever, until Quintana came along.
Wow!
So that gives you a real perspective on the competition level back then.
Yeah, amazing.
It was the pros were very tactical, and the races were longer, but they didn't go any harder or any faster.
I want to talk more about the Coors Classic. You've mentioned it a few times. Obviously, it was a huge part of American bike racing. We look back on it now as this sort of turning point in cycling in the United States. Did you realize you were part of such a big thing in the moment? I mean, while you were racing, was it like, man, this is a next level thing for racing in the United States? I mean, did you realize that you were sort of making history while you were racing Coors Classic or Red Zinger?
Not as much as it turned out to be, but yes, at the time, we realized that was a really big deal and a game changer because it was a real stage race, much more, a huge break from all of the criterium and one-day racing that we'd been doing. Right. And it was a very difficult race to prepare for because it was at altitude. And if you don't live at altitude, and even if you try to acclimate, it's still so hard to recover. It's so hard to sleep well. And so if you were going to race well there, you had to show up at least 10 days in advance and get used to living at altitude in order to make the efforts and recover for a week-long event. Otherwise, you'd have a few good days, and then you would just fall apart.
Yeah, succumb to the altitude.
And the racing was difficult. I mean, the format was a little different in that there were criteriums mixed in. It wasn't all stage racing. Unfortunately, I think maybe sponsor pressure as well. The problem became the transfers, and if Coors wanted the race to be in Hawaii and come back to San Francisco and then transfer to Colorado for stages, it wound up being not good preparation for the riders.
Yeah.
To go on to Worlds, and in the year in 1986, the year that the Worlds were in Colorado Springs, all the pros used it, except I think Sean Kelly was the only guy that came in and he might have got third that year, got a medal that didn't race at the Coors Classic. So the guys were altitude acclimated, the pros.
Yeah.
And of course, by that time, it was the Greg LeMond and Bernard Hinault show, and they were amazing. Greg was amazing from a very young age. He was a guy who could sprint with Davis Finney in a criterium. He could climb with the best climbers in the world, and he could time trial. He really didn't seem to have any weaknesses. And so that was unimaginable, and he was able to race at the level that I think had always been the dream for all of the American racers from my generation, that we could keep training and racing and get better and better and eventually compete at that level. Yeah. And he was the one that pulled it off.
If you could go back and pick one race to relive, not to change the outcome or to change the way that you experienced it, but just to live it again and experience again, what would you go back and do? Would it be another trip to the Olympics? Would it be another Coors Classic? Like if you could go back today and relive as a racer, what race would you go back to?
Oh, that's such a hard question. As far as the Olympics, in 1972, my goal was to make the Olympics, and I got there, and I was a participant. I wasn't competitive.
Right.
In 76, we were much better, and I had an injury. I mean, George Mount got sixth place, so we knew our riders that our level was good enough because George drove the breakaway and got last in a six-rider break. If he had ridden tactically, he should have had a medal. He was good enough. Just on any given day in the right circumstance, we had riders, myself, Dale, Mike Neal wound up getting 10th at Pro Worlds after the Olympics. In 1980, that was the year Le Mans was on the team, and my brother Dale and I were on that team, and it was a boycott year, so we didn't get to go to the Olympics. And the next year, Greg slayed all the Russians, including the Olympic champion, during the Coors Classic. He just buried them. So that was an indication of, the level of our team and what might have been. And then in 84, I didn't make the team, and they won all the medals, but the Russians and the East Germans weren't there. But, they were beatable in spite of their medical program.
Yeah.
So
additional training.
Yeah, and I mean, so now I'm 64, and I don't regret my choices not to be on one of those programs. I had a lot of conversations with Steve Tilford. I always loved to get together with him before his tragic death. We would usually get together during the NASCO ride in the fall, and he used to joke. He says, are we idiots or what? He said, you and Dale, you could have made so much money if you would have done what these guys are doing. And it's yeah, but I'm 64 now, and I'm still really healthy, and I'm riding well. And a lot of those guys are dead from cancer of all different types. So it's from that perspective. Plus, we could have won, but the money changed another 4, 5, 6. I mean, Le Mans changed everything about salaries, and then there was, pro cycling really, really changed in terms of being able to actually, if you were successful, you would become a millionaire. That was never the case when I was younger. So, I had a professional career at Shimano, and maybe the Little 500 would have been, that was one of the most exciting races. I was on the winning team with Del Kai in 1973 and 1974. And when you're in a stadium on a cinder track and you've got 20,000 screaming fans, that's a very different experience from any other bike race I've ever ridden.
Yeah, screaming college students, we should know.
And some of them, a lot of them may have been drinking, although they weren't supposed to. So the first year, I think I rode 144 laps, and there was a crash in front of me, and I couldn't get around the guy without hitting the wall. He was just spreading out in front of me. Yeah. And so I finally tagged his helmet and endoed in the air. I landed on my feet, running as fast as I could, went back, grabbed my bike, and the rear wheel was tweaked and the tire was coming off the bead. So I had to come in and make a bike change. And we put the other guys on to sprint as hard as they could go. And that was a mistake because one rider who wound up doing 3 laps, we were within 10 yards of going a lap down when I got back on the bike and got up to speed. And I unlapped us and got to the back of the field. And then our other 2 guys were able to get back to the front. And although I was the rookie, I was able to control the sprint tactically and beat a guy that was fast enough to be on the national track team. And because it wasn't a banked track, it was very different sprinting when you could sprint down the straightaway and then you had to coast through the turn, and then reaccelerate.
It's kind of like a cinder track, right? Or
yeah, it's a running track around a football field in a football stadium. Right. And so you ride a gear that is a 72-inch gear, and it was 2 hours and 8 or 9 minutes for 50 miles.
Stock bikes too, right? We should point that out.
They were AMF Roadmaster bikes on balloon tires. We had 26-inch wheels. They went later to 700C with faster bikes and a faster surface, but it's a 4-man team and you do exchanges. And I don't know that I've ever ridden harder in my life than, I mean, that was like track competition, doing multiple team pursuits and pursuit efforts and a points race. And yeah, so I rode 144 out of 200 laps, if I recall correctly. Wow. The next year, I went back with a team that was good enough to win the pole without me at qualifications. I went to a bike race. And we had a lot of all-star riders on that team. They could well have won without me on the team. And the day before the race, I hadn't even been on the track, and I thought I better get back out there just to see what it feels like before I race again. So I went out and I did a training stint, and I checked out all the riders, and I made a few efforts and just got used to sliding around on the cinders. And I came back to our fraternity for dinner that night, and I said to everybody at dinner, I said, okay, so I checked out the competition today, and I know how good our team is. I said, do you guys want to win by 2 laps or 3? And everybody, they couldn't believe that. And I said, 2 laps is easy. 3 laps is a bit more challenging, but I'm confident that we could do it with the team we have. Yeah. I made a major strategic error. We did win by 2 laps, and then we just cruised. I rode 92 laps. Everybody else was dying. We were in the pits looking at each other on trainers, arguing about who got to get back on the bike next because nobody was tired, because we weren't on full attack mode the whole time. And that was a strategic error, because then everybody that raced a bike in category 3 or higher was banned. So it was a bloodbath the next year, because they took out all the experienced riders. Right. They didn't have anybody to teach the people how to ride bikes that really understood bike racing anymore that was in it. We had a bike racing fraternity that split with Delta Chi and actually created the Cutters team, which has been the dominant bike racing, won the bike race more than any other fraternity, even though it's only existed since the mid-'80s, I think.
Yeah. That's something that a lot of people don't know, or I guess don't realize, that that's a real, I mean, a team. There's a team that races under the Cutters, not just from breaking away. It's not a made-up movie.
Well, that's
team.
Where they took the name. And
yeah, but they're still racing under that name, which I think is super cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is very cool. When I go back, my loyalties are divided. I don't know who to cheer for. Yeah. But
when was the last time you went back? I mean, do you try and go back and watch the race? I think it's one of the coolest bike races in the world.
I was back a few times in the mid-2000s. Usually it conflicts with Sea Otter. There's always some other cycling event that I need to go to professionally for Shimano. When my third brother Joel went to IU, he didn't have a racing license as a senior, so he slipped through that rule. And they passed a rule that said if you've ever been a member of a junior world championship team, you're ineligible. And there's only ever been one person go to IU that fit that description. They didn't want to say names, so they would take us. They would take out the Stetina family, me and and I can understand it, because when they passed that rule,
I wouldn't want to race against you guys either.
Well, it would have been me and Dale.
Right.
After the '76 Olympics, we would have been eligible to race. I was on the winning teams in '73 and '74. And you do depend on your teammates. I mean, even when I rode 144 laps, it was too hard of a race for me to do the whole thing by myself. And if any of your teammates had a problem or a crash, you're out. And they didn't. They were good riders. And they avoided, they kept it upright and did their job, and the team won. If it had been me and Dale together on the same team, that would have been ridiculous. Yeah. So in some ways I can understand that how it went, or that it was a good thing. that we didn't do that. I think at that point in my career, if I'd had a water bottle on the bike, and with Dale, if we'd been on separate teams, just on two bikes, we could have ridden the whole thing as a two-man time trial.
There you go.
And we would have been under 2 hours, even on that low gear. So it's, that's no longer a bike race when it's that uneven. But there was no intramural, there was no collegiate cycling. So legally, from a technical viewpoint, if you want to go to court, but what's the point of that?
Yeah. Let's keep the little 500 out of court.
Yeah.
It's just a bike race. But at the end of the day, it's an important bike race. So the Stetina rules are still on the book. You guys forever altered the course of the little 500 by being
I went back.
Racing your bikes.
I went back with Dale in 1988 for I can't remember what anniversary it was, and they were honoring us as little 500 alumni, and Dale looked at him. He says, "I don't even know why you're honoring me, because you banned me from riding your bike race. I never even got to get on the track." So that was. That just shows how confusing it can get.
Yeah, an ever-changing sport, and I don't think that's gonna stop anytime soon.
No. So you had said something about Shimano, and I've been there for 33 years now, so I've seen a lot of change. But when I joined Shimano, it was my job to be the Dura Ace brand manager and do all the sponsorship. And we had all the top triathletes at the time. We had Dave Scott, Mark Allen, Scott Molina, and Scott Tinley, Paula Newby-Fraser, Aaron Baker. And so I got to know a lot of the triathletes. I got a chance to ride with them. I actually had raced with Scott Molina, and he would have been a top pro racer. He was amazingly talented on the bike. But right away, I was trying to figure out how to run 7-speed systems and make it index. And so one of my friends that I got in Shimano Japan made up some factory prototype 7-speed systems. And I put it on Jeff Pierce's bike the day before Nevada City, and he lapped the field and won. And he was fast enough that he would have lapped Greg LeMond, who won the race 4 years earlier before he went on to win the Coors race. To give you an idea of the level of the domestic racing at that point. Of course, Greg had gotten better too, but that was quite interesting. 2-3 months later, we had 8-speed factory prototypes that I gave to Steve Tilford, Thurlow Rogers, and Thomas Pren for the Levi's team racing the Coors Classic.
Wow!
So even though we were selling
quickly,
we were selling 6-speed for the next 2 years. We had 8-speed prototypes in the field. Then after the second year, we went to selling 7 speeds, even though at that point we had the whole, I think we had the whole Coors Light team, or not the Coors Light, the Coors team was racing. They were all racing 8 speeds while we were still selling 7.
Was that
originally
practice?
They were on Campy. I was able to get them to switch over to Shimano, and a few years later, when after the '88 Olympics, I saw the first prototypes for dual control shifters, and when I was in Japan, and they were trying to figure out where to put the trigger lever, the release lever, because they had paddles that were more like the Campy system, and you really couldn't reach them from most positions. And I suggested the position as an auxiliary lever on the brake lever where it is now. And so that was a location that remained ever since. And I flew back from Japan. It took them a month to redesign that. And I went over to Japan when they had the next generation prototype. I flew back, got a set, and flew to Boulder, Colorado, and put it on Andy Hampston's bike before the Tour of the Americas in 1989. And he absolutely loved it. He said it was like the shifting was wired to your brain. So this was huge because all of a sudden, compared to the down tube, you were shifting twice as often. Right. So now we have generations of riders who are growing up that have never known shift levers in any position except integrated with the brake hoods and the levers. And they've never even imagined anything like a friction shifter on a down tube. I mean, how primitive is that? It all depends on how skilled the rider is each time he touches the lever. You can't sprint in the middle of a shift. You know, when I first showed Steve Bauer the index shifting a few years after he'd lost the Olympic sprint to Alexei, he rode that. He says, yeah, I knew I didn't want to ride this. If we'd had this in the Olympics, I would have been able to shift in the middle of the sprint. I started the sprint in the wrong gear. I would have been able to shift and recover. But once you start sprinting, there was no way you could change gears. You had to pick a gear for your sprint, and that was that.
Yeah, amazing how technology can have such an outcome or an impact on the outcome of a race.
Yeah. So we went to Shimano started making shoes toward the end of 87, 88, and it wasn't for 8 or 10 years before we made really good shoes. You know, when I started out, it was the guy that was making 7 and 8 speed prototypes for me. He was in charge of that project, and he said,
was also in charge of making shoes.
Well, he got that assignment, and he said, "How hard could it be?" Yeah. You know, a lot harder than I thought.
Famous last words. How hard can it be?
So we started making electronic shifting back in for not race bikes, but for
You're talking about
recreational bikes.
Yeah, the first incarnation of electronics.
The first incarnation of electronics, and our engineers kept telling me, we're going to make electronic shifting for racing bikes. And I had experienced Mavic Zap and how it went down when it got wet, and the electrical interference and all the problems you could get with it. It's like, we had 10-speed. It was so good. Why would you do this? This is just a complete, ridiculous engineering waste of effort. You know, there won't be any upside to it. And I went over in 2003 and I rode prototypes up and down in snow flurries in front of the main office. And I just came back with the DI2 giggle. just laughing.
That's an official Shimano term.
Yeah, well, no, that's people have said that, but it's the amazement that people, when they first do a test ride, like, oh my God,
why did DI2?
And it was like, forget everything I said, forget everything this is going to be. And what I was riding was like a 2-pound Frankenstein bike with all these transistors under the bottom bracket, and the engineers said, "Oh, we can clean that up. We can make that better." And they got and I said, "Well, it can't be more than 100 grams heavier." And so they got down to 150 grams. But we were testing in Europe on the cobbles in February and March during the Classics with the Rabobank team in 2004 and 2005. And they wanted to race it, even when it was a half-pound heavier, because it shifted so well. And the engineers said, no, it's not ready yet. And finally we had down to a point where in 2007, we had the whole Rabobank team at the Vuelta, rode the entire distance, the entire Vuelta without any issues. So they were ready to go, except it was 150 grams heavier. We had a guy that got third place at Pro Worlds that year on it in the road race. And the next year we were introducing the next generation Dura-Ace mechanical, which dropped 200 grams. So now it wasn't 150 grams heavier. It was so heavy that it didn't matter how good it shifted compared to the mechanical part. So they had to go back to the drawing board, and they came back, and it was only 50 grams heavier, and we introduced it in the fall of 2008. We actually shipped it like 6 months after the new mechanical version. So then the next generation, everybody knew that mechanical was done. It had no future. And there were two teams at Shimano that one was the mechanical team, and their fight was to make mechanical relevant. And the other was the Di2 team, and their fight was to make Di2 lighter than mechanical. And both teams won. So now Di2 with internal battery is actually the lightest shifting, and it's all the World Tour guys want to ride. They don't want to ride mechanical anymore. It's there have been so many stories along the way. When we were first going to integrated shifters, the dual control, I went to the 7-Eleven camp, and Dag Otto Lauritsen had been in a breakaway the year before. He would have won Pro Worlds, but he looked back and overlapped the wheel of the breakaway companion he was with and crashed out. And he was a good classics rider. He won stages in the Tour. And so I asked him, so on the down tube shifter, how many times have you ever had to turn off the index during a race? Because there was a little D-ring, you could switch it back to friction. You could make the clicks go away if it stopped working, which was critical if they ever stopped working, that you could still ride the bike. And he looked at me like I was an idiot. Like, why would I ever want to turn it off? Yeah. It always works. And I said, look, you can do this. And he goes like, I never knew that. And that was what gave us the confidence at Shimano to know that for the pro racers, the top guys that were winning stages at the Tour de France didn't even know they had a defeat button, an emergency bailout system out of index shifting. So, it just always worked. I went to the Tour de Trump, and we had a group on Steve Bauer's bike on the 7-Eleven team, and he was racing it. And I wanted to put it on Davis Finney's bike. Davis didn't want to do that right before the race. He didn't want to mess with his bike, of course. I said, well, look, I understand that, but I want you to go ride my bike, because my bike is, probably the most, whatever my bike is, it's the most test-ridden bike ever, by riders, by bike shop owners, mechanics, other racers. I said, here, just go ride this around, come back and tell me you don't want it. And so, go ride it for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes later, he finally comes back with this huge grin. He goes, okay, I've got to have that on my bike.
The integrated shifter smile.
That was the integrated shifter smile. I mean, it's always the next thing is from what was before is, and when we do something and we're going to obsolete product, if all the product managers don't get that reaction, like, okay, I don't want to ride the old parts anymore. I need this new stuff on my bike. Now that I've seen it, I've got to have it. Yeah. If we get that reaction, we know we've got a winner. And Steve Tilford told me later, the first stage of the Tour de Pont, Davis Finney was the most obnoxious person in the pro peloton. He just kept riding up and down, telling everybody in the race, look at this. Look at how I can shift my bike. This is unbelievable. And then he beat the preeminent road sprinter at the time, Eric Van der Arden on the Panasonic team. Yeah. He won a close sprint, and he said later he won because he started in an easier gear where he could jump and save energy, and then in the middle of the sprint he shifted gears twice and was able to come around easily and win the sprint. He said without that shifting, that was a sprint that he was sure that he would have never won it.
Yeah.
So, it made a difference, and you have those product ambassadors, the guys that I'm still dealing with that are out there, promoting Shimano and have these stories during the development that, it changed their racing career.
I was going to say,
races that they won.
I have to imagine there were some Rabobank guys that were more than happy to show off their cool new electronic shifting in the peloton. I'm sure it was a similar thing the first time they got on a race. When you can, it's always cool to have the latest and greatest, the coolest stuff, right?
Well,
but the cool
the
stuff
electronic
that works,
in many ways works so similar to mechanical. But it's quicker and more consistent. What's neat about it now is the way you can customize it to make a recovery shift. That when you shift the chain ring to the big ring, it can simultaneously go into a smaller cog in the back. So it's like you're shifting a 53-42 instead of a wide ratio. And when you go to the small ring, it shifts out so that you're not spun out and have to slow down before you can catch up, or you have to do that shift manually. So it does a shift for you that you were going to do anyway, and it becomes more efficient. I mean, when I get used to the climbing switch, when I'm on top of the bars and I'm in rhythm climbing, and I can just click off the shifts without moving my hands.
Yeah.
As soon as I get on, that's the thing. That's the only thing I miss when I go to mechanical right now, because the mechanical is so light and such a short stroke. I describe it to people as being a mechanical version of electronic shifting. But you can't do, because you don't really push the buttons, even for the front derailleur. It's not that significantly harder to shift with our newest front derailleurs than the electronic is. The stroke is maybe twice as far. If you've choked up on the levers, it's not really a big deal. And so if you have smaller hands, or the women, it's a bigger deal. But for most men, it's like they could ride either one. But it's really, as the refinements come, and now we're seeing disc brakes, and I was a big naysayer for that for the longest time, because I didn't think that the braking performance was worth the weight penalty. And now you've got teams like Trek Segafredo that their bikes are under the legal limit, and they almost have to ballast them to be legal, even with dual discs. So it's strange that they've had the same weight limit for the last over 10 years now, and it's really, you can buy so many bikes off the shelf that are more than durable enough for Paris-Roubaix that you have to add a substantial, you have to add the better part of a pound and a half in order to be UCI legal. It's just kind of silly.
So just for the record, you're on board with disc brakes now? This is a hotly debated topic still today.
Well, for myself, I would probably prefer to be a pound and a half lighter.
Yeah.
That's a full water bottle. And for me, with limited horsepower trying to keep up, I get dropped on the climbs. So, I want to bias toward, I'm not racing, I want an illegally light bike.
Right, sure.
The next thing is electronic assist bikes. And what people don't realize is that when it's done well, the way our steps bike has the least surge or lag, it's not a throttle. You have to pedal. If you don't pedal the bike, you don't go. But you pedal just as hard as you always would. You just get there quicker. And so it makes transportation on a bike more effective, or you're not all sweaty when you get into work. And people that get on one of those bikes, they get the electric assist giggle. They just like, I got to have one.
Yeah.
Our industry has gotten incredibly good at selling more and more bikes to the same enthusiasts.
Yeah.
And there is, 95% of the American public is never going to have any interest in riding a bike. And suddenly, now you have a bike that's a game changer for the non-cycling market. To say, hey, this is a fun experience. You don't have to be super fit. You can get up the hills. And one of the biggest things, I've been involved with Davis Phinney ever since he started the Davis Phinney Foundation. And last year, at the Copper Triangle Fonda, which was their big fundraiser for the year right before the Colorado Classic, we rode that, and it was brutally hard, and it went out of Vail Pass and finished in Copper Mountain, came down the easy side. So Vail Pass is a monster climb. It doesn't get hard until after the time trials, where they did the time trial stage for all the Colorado Classics. And then it gets to be 10% and steeper, even a 15% pitch for a while, and you're at like 8,000 feet hitting 15%. That is just insane. Davis rode it on an electric assist bike, and he had a great time. And there's no way he could have ridden on a pedal bike. It's
Sure.
His Parkinson's has progressed too far. But I was able to talk to one of their board members who's a physician and a research physician, and now they have proof that the neuromuscular activity of cycling at 90 RPM when you don't ride too hard or more actually regenerates brain cells in the part of the brain that dies from Parkinson's.
Wow.
From lack of dopamine. So the old knowledge that you can never grow new brain cells has been proven false in that limited circumstance. And this has major implications toward finding a cure. But the main thing is it explains all the anecdotal evidence why people that are riding RAGBRAI that have Parkinson's can cut their medication in half without tremors. It explains the benefit scientifically that we knew was happening. So the Davis Phinney Foundation, their message to everyone with Parkinson's next year is go buy an electric assist bike, a pedelec bike, because then you can do the cycling that will be good for your health and, prolong your quality of life without getting over fatigued or getting stranded because you get somewhere and you can't, and you're too tired to get home. Because that's the key, is not to exercise to exhaustion, because when you do that, then it's counterproductive. And you can imagine the impact that will have outside the people who would normally consider buying a bike, because everyone who's got Parkinson's, if they go out and test ride one of these bikes, and then their family members and their friends see them riding and having a great time, they'll be curious. And all of a sudden, the demand for assist bikes could suddenly become greater than the entire current sales within a period of a few years. I could imagine that we'll be selling more electric assist bikes in this country than all the current bikes that are being sold each year at bike retailers. Right now, over half the bikes sold in Germany are electric assist. It just shows how fast the markets can shift.
And speaks to the type of cyclists, that we have too, trying to grow cycling in America from just this highly competitive, sufferfest, bury yourself, go as hard as you can, to, hey, maybe we can actually enjoy riding our bikes or use them for utilitarian purposes.
Oh, absolutely. I have always loved this sport because if you just sit on the seat, riding a bike can be as easy as you want to make it, from, just going for a walk to just, a sufferfest. But that depends on flat ground. And as soon as you get a bit of a hill, then it becomes a power to weight ratio thing. And so all of a sudden, to me, I've always been fairly fit, but I can imagine, or I can easily relate to, on a day when I'm really tired and I can't get up a hill, it's still much, much easier for me than it is for somebody who's not fit and coming from a cycling background, or maybe has 100 pounds to lose, but wants to get out and enjoy cycling. And it's easier than going for a walk, but you're still doing an activity that's good for you. And it's amazing for any type of a TBI. I've been involved with Ride to Recovery since 2008, and Shimano's been a major sponsor of that. It's now rebranded as Project Hero, and still Ride to Recovery for the week-long challenges. And they get all these military vets that have been injured and are using bikes as rehab. For TBI, the results, the benefits for stuttering, for medication, as soon as they start exercising, it's just been staggering to their medical providers and to the health professionals at all the VA hospitals. So cycling, neuromuscular control and activity, and the processing of the balancing and looking around everything you're doing is something that you can do even if you can't walk or you can't jog. And the rhythmic activity of it is, and so now with Parkinson's, we've seen, we're starting to get an idea that this is for any type of rehab injury that you have a mental component, and it doesn't just have to be, getting blown up by an IED in the war. It could be traffic accidents as well. Sure. We've got a lot of first responders that fire department and police department.
You talked about Ride to Recovery. I can only imagine what you can do with adaptive bikes. I mean, people that need specialty bikes to fit a disability or fit their body, being able to put those shifters wherever you want, that's got to be a game changer too.
Oh, it is. And I've got another lady that was a triathlete late in life who's come down with cancer, and she has no use of her left hand. I just had the conversation yesterday that they're going to bring her bike by on Monday. But this was another thing that when I was developing electronic shifting, I'm thinking about my world and racing and all the advantages and the benefits of it. And when I got involved with Ride to Recovery, they became the preeminent producers of adaptive bikes. And then all of our tech guys online on the, our service line, we tried to keep them up to speed because bike shops around the country were doing that. And that is one of the things that is so unique about the Shimano system is the customizability, being able to make any shifter control either derailleur in either direction, put everything on one side. You don't need two hands to operate the front derailleur. It could be, it's just one button for each operation. And we actually worked together with Ride to Recovery about 6-7 years ago to make a bike for a quad amputee that had lost both legs, and below the knee, I think, or above the knee, and one arm, and then he had lost one hand. And set it up with a pad to push down to work both hydraulic brakes together. It was like an upright bike with flat bars, and
so
he had a bunch of pads that he could push that were tied into the buttons to shift his front or his rear derailleur. And so one hand was connected to the bar with a prosthetic that had a clamp on it that would fit over a bar end. And then he could control the bike with that, while with his stump he was either working the brakes or the derailleurs. And he was able to ride 50 or 60 miles on, if it wasn't extremely hilly, just slightly rolling, unassisted. and averaged like 15 miles an hour. He had incredible balance. He would roll up for a red light. He would be going at maybe half a mile an hour, just barely moving. He would just sit there.
Roll up to the light.
Yeah, because he didn't want to clip out, and it turned out that I have to admit, for a lot of the guys that have these type of injuries, our pedal doesn't work the best. It turned out to be speed play, and I'll tell them, if you want to ride a bike, the way you step in and you come out with no effort, you just have to change the angle.
Right.
Works consistently better for a lot of these injuries that have prosthetic legs. And then some of them, we've developed systems that are the clicker system for road is a much lower effort than any of our more competitive systems. It's more of a touring system with a mountain bike cleat, recessed shoe. So, there is no one answer, but we try to consult with these retailers or the individuals, and as long as they're not stuck in one gear all the time, then the only thing they could do then is ride along the beach. It allows them to tackle different terrain, and they realize that their athletic career is not over. And we've had a number of people through these programs that have gone on to win national and even world titles in paracycling, including Paralympics. So, that's really exciting to see people that can find a whole new passion for athletics and fitness and health, and it's all related around cycling, because I used to joke that it's just riding bikes. It's not like you're curing world hunger, but in some ways for these people, you're changing their lives. You're getting them out of off all their heavy meds because they're so suicidal with so much survivor guilt, and you're helping them find a reason to go forward. And so then you feel like, maybe playing around and making better bike components really does make a positive difference in the world.
The power of the bike.
And I get paid to go ride my bike and do product reports.
An added bonus, I'm sure. Well, Wayne, I hate to do this, but we got to wrap this up. Thanks for taking the time today. You've been there for some of the biggest tech advancements, and it sounds like we're just getting started with the next big one coming out from you guys at Shimano.
The most exciting tech advancement has always been the newest one that I'm working on now, and that's one thing that I just love about working at Shimano.
It never ends, right? So can you tell us what you're prototyping now? Like, what are we going to see in 10 years? I know you can't give away any secrets, but...
No, I can't. Shimano, though, doesn't work as far out as a lot of people think. There's a lot of conspiracy thinking, or they've got all their designs done 10 years in the future.
They're testing put them floating in bikes over in Japan.
Yeah, they just put it all in a vault and then they pull it out when they need it. It's like, no, they're working as hard as they can to solve the issues of putting what they're trying to do now into production and producing it. And that has been one of Shimano's greatest strengths, has been to see the manufacturing ability to bring technology down to a lower price point through very efficient mass production techniques and smart engineering. So that once we get a new technology and debut it at Dura-Ace, and there's a lot of crossover from Dura-Ace to XTR. Actually, there's a lot of crossover even into fishing, because fishing, which is about 25% of the total business, fishing's only been around since 1972. Shimano has been around since the 20s. We're getting close to the 100-year anniversary here coming up in the not too distant future. Fishing is brakes for the drag and gears. And we actually have engineers cross back and forth, and there have even been a few cases where some patents have been shared back and forth between bike and fishing. And Shimano gets about a patent a week internationally. And Shimano is never focused on getting patents to block our competitors from doing things. it's always the primary focus for Shimano has always been we don't want anybody to tell us what products we can't make. If we develop a technology, we want to have the patents that allow us to sell that technology in the market.
You're on the defense, not the offense.
Correct.
All right. Well, thanks for taking the time again. We got to do this again. Our next episode, I want to talk about the latest innovations in the Shimano fishing department. I want to hear all about this.
Well, that's not going to be me.
Well, you better study up.
No, I can find somebody that loves fishing as much as I love to ride my bike.
The Wayne Stetina of fishing. It's got to be out there somewhere.
Well, we have people in our company that just live to go fishing.
All right, send them my way. I'll start a separate podcast just for them. Wayne, thanks for taking the time today, man. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's an honor to be part of your Legends broadcast.
Well, it's an honor to talk to such a legend. Hope you get a bike ride in today if you haven't already, and enjoy beautiful California. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Hey, it's going to be 80 degrees here today. Yes, I will get a bike ride, and because I talk longer, I won't have to do it in arm warmers and leg warmers. I always ride my bike to work every day, and I seldom take a direct route to get there.
My hero. We could all be a little more like Wayne Stetina. All right, thanks, Wayne. Talk to you again.
Okay.
This has been another episode of Laser Radio. Be sure to check out more great shows on the Wide Angle Podium Network. Until next time, I'm Brad Soner, saying thanks for listening.